to have a short discussion. I have a lot of points to dig into, but I'll keep it brief, and then we'll open it up to everyone for any questions you may have. One thing I really wanted to talk about, or at least kind of put into perspective, is this idea of role model. I think a lot of what we're talking about is Jon Muir as a role model, and to what extent he is or isn't. Jon actually wrote a very eloquent follow-up to the LA Times article, and I just wanted to quote something you had written. Jon Muir was a terrific hero for the 19th and 20th centuries, and he accomplished amazing things in his own life and in the work he has inspired. But while we might take inspiration from Muir as a founder of the environmental movement, we can't count on him for guidance now any more than we can turn back to George Washington as a guide to politics today. So I wonder, you bring up the term hero, and in thinking about it in this perspective, do you think that there's something, are we missing a particular person today? Are we missing a leader?
I think yes, but it might not be the time for that kind of leader or hero anymore. And I think that thinking historically, Jon Muir was very much a man of his times, and there were possibilities for that kind of writing to have real prominence and salience among a particular particularly among the elite in America, that's just really much harder and maybe impossible to do in the kind of cacophonous, diverse world that we live in. So we might really need new ways of thinking about what leadership means.
Yeah, I love that you brought up social media too, the ways that people are interacting with parks in different ways. Did you have any thoughts, Glenn?
Well, I do want to come back to are we looking for the one great leader? And I think that in many ways that time has passed. I mean, think about this for people of my age. You would eagerly await the next album by, let's say, the Beatles or something, and everybody would know that music, and that would dominate, and they would be the trendsetters and leaders. Look at in music today. Everybody listens to something different. People have a fairly short shelf life. There's such diversity, in part because we can now stream it, we can download it. It's such a wide playing field, such a huge palette. And I think that's true with thought also. So I think the Jon Muirs today are found in the leadership of Outdoor Afro, for instance, and some of the Latino movements, and in places like the Sierra Club, where it's individuals trying to make a difference. I'm not sure that they'll ever have that same platform anymore, because everything has become distributed, right? But if we have enough people in these distributed areas that are trying to do good, then we'll achieve something.
I think it does have to do also with that notion of people don't. I think people don't want to be spoon-fed information, and I think that there were possibilities, for a Jon Muir or others to really kind of speak for people. And that's much more difficult, and maybe that's good in an era in which people want to participate in conversations. They want to be heard. They don't want to be lectured to.
I wonder, we talked in October, we had a man named John Young come and speak, and part of what he talked about was the low membership of organizations like the Sierra Club and the Audubon Society. I wonder what you think the future of organizations like that are. I mean, is everything changing in the sense that people are going to be more engaged in social media rather than being part of the actual organization?
Well, all those are, and I think that was part of the trouble that I ran into was people interpreted what I said, when I say Jon Muir may no longer be relevant as saying that the Sierra Club is no longer relevant. And I didn't say that. And I know that, and I've, I knew beforehand, and now I really know because they told me, you have to come talk to us. And I went to San Francisco and spent a couple hours talking with them and learned much more about what they're doing. And I had known much of that already. They're doing a heck of a lot to try and reinvent themselves, to try and figure out how to engage, with diverse Californians, diverse Americans. And part of that is they're desperate to figure out how to connect. How to matter, and I think they're doing a really great job, and it's also causing them to rethink their relationship to communities and not come in to communities and say, we have the answers, we need you to get in line and help us, stop this development or put in, this protected area, but they're going into communities and asking what's important in those communities. And sure, coming in with their basic, environmental goals and values, but understanding that they gotta meet halfway and listen. So, there's a lot of really good, important work, happening in the environmental organizations, as well as in the National Park Service and in California State Parks to figure this out.
I would agree. I think that they really are making a very genuine effort, and they're making a genuine effort to reach into the cities and to redefine nature, including the Sierra Club. Absolutely true. I think when you stand back, there's a larger context here, and that is this fact that people don't want to be spoon-fed. There's many different ideas. They all want to be heard, right? And I think that the dynamics which brings people together in these organizations that have a hierarchy are changing in this country. And I'll give you two examples. The Occupy movement. Occupy movement got a lot of attention, a lot of excitement, but there was no end game. There was no focus, there was no leadership, and no one's occupying anything anymore. And on the other end of this political spectrum, the Tea Party. The Tea Party was formed, but it eschewed any kind of hierarchy, and it was almost like you were an individual, and that's what defined you as a Tea Party member, or you're libertarian or something. And again, its sway has kind of collapsed. And so I do wonder if there isn't larger context with the grappling with organizations in a landscape where there's so many voices can now be heard and want to be heard. And so I do wonder if there's other deeper things than just the environmental club membership. It's a lot of clubs, a lot of organizations that are losing members, and so I think this is broader.
One of the big focuses of our school is nature connection and making sure that nature is a part of what we're doing, that there's a conscious connection to nature. I wonder, in the past 100 years, in the course of John Muir's legacy, do you think that people have become more out of touch with nature? If so, how do we get back in touch?
So I think that there are reasons for concern. And I think the things like you're doing at the school are really great. Where my concern with it though is that we often measure are people connected to nature. A lot of those studies that say people are less connected to nature are looking at things like membership in these organizations, or visiting national parks, or fishing licenses, or hunting licenses. And I'm not sure that those are the only ways to measure people's connections to nature. What about gardens in the city, or pets even? I talk with a lot of people who have very deep connections to nature through animals, or through gardening, and I think we do know that having a connection to nature and having nature in your life is really important. There's enough studies of that for like health, for cognitive, abilities, for feeling good about the world. But we also know that if you it might be a little sacrilegious here, like, is if you don't, if you can't get out into nature, being able to see nature from a window is pretty darn good. And even being able to see nature on a TV screen can do part of it. Those are. I know you're shaking your heads, but there have been studies that have. That have looked at this, and so I'm a little bit like, I think we should really think capaciously about all the ways to, think about, to interact with nature. So a friend of mine has a daughter, he was going to take her to the aquarium in San Francisco, and she wanted to bring her iPad, and he was like, no, don't bring the iPad. We're going to see nature, leave it home. And she insisted, and they went to the aquarium, and she went through with the iPad, taking pictures, taking notes. And like by the time they were done and they got home, she had posted like a story about their trip to the aquarium, was sharing it with friends. I think that's pretty cool.
All right, so to wrap up, Jon Muir, I'm curious, we've talked about a lot of, benefits and the maybe not so great aspects of his legacy. As the Jon Muir Memorial Chair of Geography, what is his relevance today?
Well, first off, of course, there's just physical things that he left us, the national parks that he left us, and in a sense, an organization which is evolving, the National Park Service, which could do good things in the future and has great people who are well aware. I mean, the numbers I'm quoting, a lot of them come from studies the National Park Service has done. So he left us a physical heritage. Also would say, as the reaction to John's quotes in the article showed, for a lot of people, he's still a very strong emotional motivator for people to care about nature, to care about the wilderness. And I think some of the reaction was because people felt that we were dismissing them. We were dismissing their deep felt care about nature, about what they've put into it. And I think that would be wrong. And I think that we have to have a tent that's big enough for those people that were motivated and love him, that's okay, and that I don't think the intention ever was to sort of say, well, you guys don't matter anymore. And I've gotten that in some of my own writings when I talked about the importance of opening up to the city or opening up to people of color and things like that. It's not saying that people that look like me don't matter or people that really love his writing don't matter. It's just to open it up. So I think it's there. I think the other thing that I find really interesting is Muir was a contradictory person. He had a lot of contradictions. Mm-hmm. And frankly, being an environmentalist today, if you're realistic, it's a world full of contradictions and compromise. Mm-hmm. And I think studying him and getting deeper into that is really interesting territory. And I'm not sure he ever was able to balance those contradictions. I'm not even sure he tried to. But we have to grasp with exactly the same sets of contradictions today. And I think that in the low-hanging fruit, most of it's gone. We're going to be in a world of contradiction and compromise. And kind of thinking about how he dealt with that is, to me, really interesting. And it shows that, the more things change, the more, in a sense, they stay the same.